Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. Welcome back to Troll the Verse, where we dig through scripture one chapter at a time and point out everything your preacher conveniently ignores. We've got full playlists covering Matthew, Genesis, Revelation, and now the Book of Mormon. Check the description if you want to see more biblical breakdowns. And if you like watching ancient texts fall apart under their own weight, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe, because there's plenty more where this came from. Now, before we jump in, a quick note. YouTube has community guidelines, so we have to word things very carefully for this episode. If some phrasing sounds oddly delicate, just know it's because YouTube's AI doesn't have a sense of humor. With that said, let's get into Genesis 17, where God shows up again to re-explain the covenant, rename some people, and introduce the world's most invasive membership requirement. Oh, look, God's back again. Because apparently the first two times he made this covenant weren't enough. He has to reiterate it here again. Jehovah introduces himself as God Almighty, El Shaddai, as if Abraham needed a reminder of who keeps appearing out of nowhere. Also, the first command, walk before me and be thou perfect, right? Because that's a totally reasonable request. No try your best, just flat out perfection. No pressure, Abraham. Then God promises again to multiply Abraham. We heard this exact thing back in Genesis 12 and 15. This deity has serious commitment issues because every few chapters he has to pop in and reconfirm the deal. Did God forget? Did Abraham forget? Why does this need so many reminders? And Abraham's reaction? He falls on his face. Again. This man spends half his life face planting every time God speaks. Either he's terrified or just sick of hearing the same speech on repeat. At 99 years old, that's a dangerous hobby. But there it is, falleth. Sounds less like a respectful bow and more like the old man just ate dirt. He's got to be getting some serious bruising by now with the amount of falling he's been doing. Oh good, another covenant confirmation, because clearly Abraham needs to hear the same speech on loop before it sinks in. The first big news? Abram gets a name change because adding an H makes it official. Congratulations, Abraham. You've been upgraded from exalted father, Abram, to father of many, Abraham, even though he only has one kid at this point. Seems a little premature. And then there's the land promise. God gifts all of Canaan to Abraham's descendants forever. Because that's gone so smoothly throughout history, apparently everlasting possession doesn't mean what it sounds like, because Canaan has been taken, retaken, and fought over for thousands of years. How exactly is this an eternal claim if it's constantly being conquered? Then comes the strangest line yet. I have become their God. Wait, so he wasn't their God before? If God has to become their God, who exactly were they worshiping earlier? If this is an exclusive contract, why does the Bible later mention Abraham's descendants still struggling with idol worship? Such as Jacob's household in Genesis 35, was this just an official title upgrade, or was God competing for their attention? And if this covenant is so permanent and binding, why does God keep repeating it like someone nervous about getting ghosted? All right, the long-awaited divine requirement, because after multiple covenant speeches, name changes, and vague land promises, God finally reveals the real sign of faith, an irreversible body modification. God doesn't want a public oath, a moral code, or even a simple I agree contract. Even Satan lets you sign on the dotted line nowadays. No, the only acceptable way to prove you're in this covenant is a mandatory surgical procedure. All right, let's go over this because there's actually a lot here. Every male must undergo the procedure, no exceptions. Babies are included. This is the official token of the covenant. Because faith alone isn't enough, God needs a physical receipt. It must happen on the 8th day, because nothing says wisdom like performing unnecessary surgery on a newborn. Even enslaved people must comply, because coercion is totally ethical when it's divinely mandated. And if you refuse, you're cut off from the community, and that pun was totally intended. So let's ask the obvious question here. Why does God need a physical mark at all? If he's omniscient, shouldn't he already know who's in the covenant? Why such a hidden personal sign? Wouldn't it make more sense to have a visible mark, like a tattoo, bracelet, or literally anything else? And why now? God's been dealing with Abraham for decades, promising nations and land, but only now does he bring this up. Where does this even come from? Well, I researched a little, like I do. The Bible makes it seem like circumcision was a unique Hebrew practice, but the Egyptians right next door did it first. Egyptian priests and elites underwent this procedure as a sign of purity and status, meaning this wasn't some brand new revelation. So, was Yahweh just repackaging an older religious practice and making it mandatory? And if so, why was this particular Egyptian custom the one worth keeping, while everything else Egyptian was condemned as pagan? The Hebrews weren't supposed to worship Egyptian gods, eat Egyptian foods, or adopt Egyptian customs, except for this one thing. So just to be clear, Egyptian religion was bad, except for this practice. Got it. And let's not forget that the Bible is obsessed with blood rituals, animal sacrifices, Passover smears, and Jesus's drink my blood symbolism. Circumcision conveniently fits right into this theme. It's the first shedding of blood in a male's life, performed as a sacred rite. It's a physical offering to Yahweh. The bloodshed is seen as part of the covenant agreement. Exodus 4:24 through 26 makes it even stranger. God literally tries to kill Moses, but his wife circumcises their son and smears the blood on Moses to stop Yahweh's wrath. So one must stop here and ask, if circumcision was just a sign of the covenant, why would it suddenly act as a blood ritual that saves Moses from God's execution? This makes no sense unless circumcision was literally considered a form of appeasement to Yahweh. In other words, this wasn't just a mark of the covenant, it was a ritual blood sacrifice. So was it about faith, or was it about offering fresh blood to a deity that seems strangely obsessed with it? If circumcision was so crucial to the covenant, why did early Christianity suddenly drop it? Paul completely dismisses circumcision in his letters, saying it no longer matters. If this was a permanent covenant, why did Christianity find it so easy to erase? Well, probably because Paul realized that forcing Greeks and Romans to undergo this procedure was a bad conversion strategy. Seriously, imagine Paul trying to convert grown adult men and telling them, oh, by the way, step one is mandatorily cutting off some of your junk. It probably wouldn't have gone over well. That's a hard sell. So Paul conveniently revised the rules to say circumcision was now spiritual instead of physical. So essentially, the eternal covenant got thrown out when it became inconvenient. Today, circumcision continues in religious and medical settings, despite growing opposition. But why? Some argue it's still about control, enforcing conformity, and tying people to religious traditions without their consent. It's still heavily promoted in some cultures despite no clear medical necessity, and yet nobody questions why this ancient ritual from a desert tribe is still practiced today. So was this ever really about divine will, or was it always about controlling the population through deeply ingrained religious conditioning? Okay, now we get to another biblical name change. Sarai now becomes Sarah, because adding an H apparently upgrades her blessing. Does it change anything about her life? Not really, but hey, it's official now. Then God drops the real good stuff here. Sarah, at 90, is going to have a baby. Naturally, Abraham, seeing the obvious issue here, he literally falls over laughing. That's how plausible he finds this plan. And yet God doesn't smite him. Now remember, people get vaporized for far less later on. Lot's wife gets turned to salt for a quick glance. Uzzah is struck dead for stabilizing the ark. But Abraham laughs in God's face and gets a pass. The difference must be that he's the star of the show. And let's be frank here, a 100-year-old father and a 90-year-old mother, Abram's reaction is the most relatable in the entire Bible. He's basically going, yeah, sure, that's going to happen. And somehow he's not punished. Abraham, being reasonable, says, hey God, how about Ishmael? Since he's already here, he's been growing up in the household, maybe he's the heir? God's response is negatory. Isaac's the real deal. Ishmael can have a side storyline, 12 princes, a nation, fine. But the main covenant is going to be with Isaac. This is biblical favoritism at its finest. Ishmael is the firstborn, but Isaac's the chosen one before he's even conceived. And let's not forget how awkward this is. Abraham's been raising Ishmael for 13 years thinking he's the heir. Suddenly God's like, actually, I have a new plan. Also, this last line, God goeth up from Abraham, So God was physically there? If so, he just pulled a vertical exit, floating away like a UFO. Not to mention the fact that he's seeing God and it's not supposed to be possible. I've already touched on that in other episodes, so not showing the contradictions on the screen this time. Yet again, here, Abraham chats with God face to face. Later theology says that's impossible. The Bible can't seem to decide which one it is. All right, and now we get to the most horrifying day in Abraham's life. God leaves, and Abraham immediately grabs a knife. No hesitation, no questions like, hey, should we at least prepare for this? No prayer, no let's ease into this, just straight to the mass circumcision event. Every male gets the treatment. Abraham is 99 years old, Ishmael is 13. All his servants, household men, and even enslaved people are included. Nobody gets a say in this. And the worst part? No anesthesia, no painkillers, no antibiotics, just raw biblical suffering. Let's talk about the logistics of this. How long did this take? This isn't just a few people, it's every male in the entire household. Did Abraham personally do every single one? Was there a lineup? And Abraham, the designated circumcision team, did Sarah help? What did recovery look like? Because walking, sitting, or even existing must have been unbearable. How did they handle infection? Did they even bother to clean the knife in between patients? They probably didn't. And Ishmael at 13 years old had to go through this. That's prime middle school age. Imagine being a teenager, minding your own business, and suddenly your 99-year-old dad shows up with a knife and says, God said so. And just like that, the chapter ends. No aftercare plan, no divine pain relief, just a bunch of men trying not to move too much for the next few weeks. Ancient faith was not for the weak. And there you have it, Genesis 17, the chapter where God reestablishes a deal he's confirmed at least twice already, changes a couple of names for dramatic effect, and then demands a permanent, intimate procedure for the entire household, because I guess that's the priority. Abraham's reaction to having a son at 100 is to fall over laughing, which is the most honest moment so far. Ishmael gets downgraded to second place despite being firstborn. God's cameo ends with him taking off skyward, leaving us with plenty of questions about divine visibility rules. In short, this chapter is a perfect look at biblical inconsistency. Lofty promises, random name tweaks, a baffling physical sign, and a comedic attempt to juggle multiple heirs. Tune in for the next chapter where things probably won't get any clearer, but hey, at least we can say it's never boring. See you next time, unless Abraham shows up with a knife and a God said so.